Hi, I'm Sam Sheehan at Stitch and Steel Homestead, and today we're going to start cooking down our maple sap and making the first batch of maple syrup this season. When you're only tapping a few trees, you've got a couple of options for boiling down your sap. You can just do it on your kitchen stove indoors. The problem with that is it creates a lot of steam. So if you have a really excellent exhaust fan system above your stove, that can work out really well for you. Unfortunately, we don't have a very good exhaust system in our kitchen, and so we just find that the steam gets a little bit overwhelming, and I spend days and days, wiping down cupboards and soaking towel after towel with all the steam that we're evaporating out of our maple syrup. So for us, because we have the facilities to do so, it just makes a lot more sense to do it outdoors. So I use the same propane burner that I use when I'm processing some of the vegetables that I can and pickle. And set it up outdoors and just kind of keep an eye on it. What I will do sometimes is bring the sap indoors for just like the last little bit where you want to watch it a little bit closer. And just then I can put it in a smaller pot and keep a better eye on it on our stovetop indoors. But for the majority of the evaporation process, I do like to keep that outside when I can. The sap buckets that we use are metal, and they're cold and hard on the hands, and they don't have a handle on them. So when I'm collecting sap, I like to bring along just a 5-gallon clean pail to collect the sap into off of these buckets on the trees. And that just makes it a little bit easier to carry. It also has a nice tight fitting lid, so I don't have to be as worried about slopping the sap all over myself as I'm trying to carry it. Whoops! There's a chunk of ice in that one, it splashed me. We should have some really good syrup this year. My fingers are quite sticky just from handling the sap, and it hasn't even been cooked down at all yet, so it's already got pretty high sugar values if it's making my fingers that sticky, which is excellent. Alright, so I've got my burner set up, I've got the propane tank attached. This is the pot I'm going to boil my sap down in. And this is the sap that I've already collected from the trees into this bucket. So I'm going to go ahead and pour as much sap as I can fit into my pot. Now I'm going to go ahead and turn on the propane and light the burner. We just want to make sure that our burner is adjusted so that we're getting the blue flame. When you're getting orange flame, that's not as hot as when it's blue. So you'll know you've got it set up right and working as efficiently as it can when you get the blue flame. Eventually the name of the game is evaporation, so we're going to want to keep the lid off and let as much steam evaporate up out of this pot as we can. But to just give it a little bit of a boost to heat up initially from being very cold liquid, I'm going to put the lid on just until it comes to a boil. Some people like to strain the sap before it gets in, or before it goes into the pot. I prefer to wait until it's cooked down a little bit and then strain it. So it's kind of a personal preference thing. So now that the sap's cooking away, I don't want to ignore it altogether, but it doesn't need to be watched super closely either. I might bring a chair out and read a book for a little bit. I might go out in the field here and do some work with my horses. I might go back into the house for, a period of time, but I'm coming out and checking on it periodically, making sure that, the fire's still lit and safe and the animals aren't getting around it, and making sure that the sap hasn't cooked down too far. We don't want to burn it, especially as we're getting towards the end. But for now, we're looking at hours and hours of boiling time, so it really doesn't need to be watched that closely just yet. So I've gone and done some other chores, and you can see the lid is actually boiling itself off here. So my sap has come to a boil. It's time to remove the lid, and that right there is exactly what we want to see. All that steam coming off that pot, that's evaporation, and that is what we're looking for. I'm going to just turn the heat down a little bit so we're not boiling over, and it doesn't really need to be aggressively boiling for it to evaporate well. So I don't know if you can see how much steam is pouring off the top of this thing, but it's just crazy, which is excellent. So it's kind of come down to a low simmer here, and that's where we want to keep it. Actually, it's still kind of a rolling boil for the most part, but it can come down to a simmer. And then I can just take my ladle and scoop off that foam there as it accumulates. Some syrup producers really like to keep their batches separate. The color of the syrup produced and the grade of it will change throughout the season a little bit. You know, having some of the clearest and lightest syrup first thing in the season, and then it gets darker towards the end. For us, because we're working with such small amounts, it doesn't really make sense for us to keep it separated that way. So we just kind of end up with one big batch of kind of a medium amber sort of colored syrup, and that works out just well for me. So what I like to do is, as the sap is cooking down, as soon as we get some space in the pot, I'll just add in some more fresh sap and add in fresh sap and just keep it going that way, and keep that pot kind of topped up until I run out of sap. Again, some people like to cook it all the way down to the syrup stage first, bottle it off, and then start again with the next batch of sap, but I like to just keep it going and roll it all into one big batch. I'm just going to go ahead and skim some of the foam off here. There we go. And now we just let it simmer away and evaporate pretty much all day. So we're on to day 2 now, and as you can see, the color's starting to get a lot darker. We've boiled down 5 whole gallons of liquid off of this sap so far. So what's happened is I used the bucket, which was full of 5 gallons of sap, to fill it up, started cooking it down. I went and collected from the trees again, so I had 5 more gallons in the white bucket here, and I've slowly added it in and added it in. Every time this gets down far enough that it wasn't going to boil over, I just add some more sap in. And so this is the color we've got today. We're not quite at maple syrup yet, but we're getting there. So now I'm gonna just keep cooking her down. So right here I've got the sap so far. It's cooked down most of, well, part of the way, but it's still quite liquidy and watery. And I'm just straining it through a flour sack tea towel right now. And as you can see, it's kind of dripping its way through down here. So this is going to catch the majority of the impurities and little bits of, you know, twig and stuff like that that's in the sap. It's not perfect. There will be some sediment in it still, but that'll settle to the bottom of the bottle, and it's pretty easy to just avoid it when you're using it. If you want to get a little more precise with it, get a really nice clear syrup. They do sell specific filters for it, but we don't bother. So I'm just going to let this run its way through here, and then I will take it inside and finish cooking it off on the stove. This is what my cloth looks like after we're done filtering. So you can see, not only has it got all these dark bits that are like bark and sticks and whatever, but all this stuff here too is like a dust or sediment, or some of it is minerals that the tree roots have pulled up and are trying to feed to their leaves. And some of it's just dust and debris that's come into the bucket. But anyways, this does a good job of capturing most of it. There's a tiny bit of it still in the syrup, but I don't lose any sleep over that. Like I was saying, you can get specialized sap filters if that's the route you choose to go. But for me, this is good enough. And this is what the filtered syrup looks like. So we've taken it from 10 gallons down to about 1. And now we need to reduce this by about 3/4. So we want 1/4 of a gallon, or roughly 1 liter, left when we're done. We're going to start tasting it though once we get another ½ gallon out of here, because those ratios are kind of general rules, and this year it tasted like our sap was a little sweeter, so we might not have to go quite down as far as we would some other years. So we're gonna test it with the thermometer, and anytime it's about 7 degrees higher than the boiling point of water, that's when we're at about the right sugar level. So that's what we'll be looking for. Unfortunately, as I was getting close to boiling down the end of that batch of sap, my in-laws showed up to return our kids to us. They'd taken them for a couple of days for a visit. And by the time I came back inside, it was boiling really vigorously and it was almost overcooked. So I needed to hustle and get it off the stove, and that meant I didn't have time to set up and video the end process of it. But this is the syrup that we got out of it, and as you can see, it's actually crystallized a little bit in the jar. So that means I took it a little bit too far, a little bit too close to the candy stage. So I should have rescued this poor pot of syrup a little bit sooner, and it got a little bit too thick, but it's going to be absolutely delicious. So I'm not too worried about that. We're going to have some mighty tasty pancakes this year. Thanks for watching our video about making maple syrup, and I hope it helps some of you guys be emboldened to try it yourself. Take care. Have a great day.